diligently discharge my duties and perform my functions in the high office.
The founding father of the Republic of Namibia, His Excellency Sam Nujoma, is no longer with us here on earth. And today we're gathered in Pretoria, Unisa campus, South Africa, to celebrate his life and legacy in the political landscape of Africa. Different leaders from various sectors of society, including business and governments, are gathered here, to pay tribute to the people and the nation of Namibia on the passing of their founding president. So stay tuned to Beyond the Ballot as we bring to you more highlights of this exceptional coverage.
Almighty ever-living God, bless this gathering for the memorial service of your departed servant, His Excellency Dr. Sam Shafiishuna Nujoma. Through the life, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, you incorporated us through baptism into the mystery and the victory over death that He has won for us. Through the prayer and faith of your church, grant to your servant, Dr. Sam Nujoma, forgiveness of sins and peace and eternal rest in you. Grant also to us, who are still pilgrims on the earthly journey, that we may keep our eyes firmly fixed on you, the source and destination of our hope. Grant all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Reverend Father Swartboy, thank you for the prayers. Let me recognize His Excellency Dr. Thabo Mbeki, the former President of the Republic of South Africa and the Chancellor of the University of South Africa. Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the former Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa and former United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Women and the Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. Advocate Mujanku Gumbi, the Chancellor of the University of Venda and the United Nations Africa Special Advisor for addressing racism in the workplace. Equally, we would like to recognize the presence of ministers of our country. We recognize the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Naledi Pandor, the former Minister of Home Affairs, and also in the Presidency, and the African Union Executive, Dr. Dlamini Zuma. Let me also recognize ministers that are present, including the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Premier of Gauteng, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi, the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Me Nomvula Mukonyane. Let's also recognize the diplomatic corps that are present here this afternoon. Who are here in solidarity also with the High Commissioner, His Excellency Mr. Veiko Giwete, the High Commissioner of the Republic of Namibia, who has invited us here and who, in solidarity, is supported by His Excellency Mr. Sali Omar, Ambassador of Eritrea and the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, and all other diplomatic representatives that are here. We recognize those that are in the list and those that were not recognized, and therefore, in the spirit of solidarity, we welcome you all, members of the Diplomatic Corps. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, representing various countries in South Africa, representatives from the national, provincial, and local government, representatives from various political parties associated with the African National Congress, but also with SWAPO in Namibia. Esteemed guests, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, students of Unisa and all other universities. It is with deep sorrow and heavy hearts that we welcome you on behalf of the Chancellor who is amongst us, the Chair of Council, Dr. Den Musia, and the University of South Africa's epistemic communities, that we extend our sincere condolences to the people of Namibia on the untimely passing of His Excellency, former President Shafiishuna Nujoma. Our sense of sorrow is even deeper because just last year, in February 2024, we hosted in this very building the memorial service for the late President Hage Geingob. It seems that life has brought us together once again to remember the towering figure in the liberation struggles of the people of Africa, Dr. Sam Nujoma, a giant for liberation of the people of South Africa, who went to become the President of the Republic of Namibia as the founding first president of the democratic era of Namibia. We at Unisa are even saddened by this passing of His Excellency President Nujoma, because we are aware that our Chancellor had identified President Nujoma for the Chancellor's Award, the Calabash Award for 2024.
Rendered a number of beautiful items here, uplifting our spirits with hymns, just taming the ambience, but also ushering, or stirring rather, the presence of God. Your thoughts, what did you pick up as a young leader from the ceremony that you just had here?
I think for us, because we do quite a lot of events like this, we actually just grateful for the opportunity just to be in spaces like this, because most of the time as musicians, you find that your life is just limited to stage, in church and theaters. But when you come into environments like this, you get to be exposed, to other things that are actually happening in the world, like political space, the history of the country and the continent at large. So for us, it's something that's really, really a pride for us not to just gather for ourselves. Yeah.
Key insights which you are taking with you home and which you leverage to consolidate your capacity in discharging your patriotic duty as a citizen of South Africa, but also a citizen of the continent of Africa.
The funny part is we were inside, I was just busy going through some of the files, from our former President Thabo Mbeki. And I think the reason why I was doing that, I was just realizing that it's so easy to just be locked up in a certain world and not think about, other things that are actually happening in a country, who's making decisions. And that was also sparked by the fact that I realized that the man we're celebrating today died at the age of 104 years. So that tells you that if Thabo Mbeki is speaking of this man who was actually 20 years older than him, and they speak of relationship that started back in the 1940s, that tells you that it's been many, many years. It's quite a range of revolution and things that have been happening. And I don't think that young people who are the same age as me actually are exposed to this kind of world or understands other things that are happening. So for me, it's challenging to say, go back, try to educate as many young people as you can, that there's actually more to life than, your own careers or where you stay, to just, expand our knowledge a bit.
Speaking of young people, civic education is lacking so much in South Africa. You can see it with how we respond in terms of voter turnout when it's time for elections, but also how we just elbow the process of participating in processes like the IDPs in our communities. Why do you think that it is important for young people to be, I don't want to use the word cajoled, but to be exposed and encouraged to be part of such programs? And how do you think it will help in terms of getting them to find relevant expression in spaces like these?
I think it's important in such a way that, I mean, if we are thinking about it, our young people in South Africa, we are reduced to trends, like what's the latest outfit that you can actually wear, what's the latest car that you can actually drive. So our knowledge when it comes to things that actually matters more, it's almost like it's hidden away from us. And it's similar to what I was saying earlier, to say the reason why I was going through like President Thabo Mbeki's files, it's because I wanted to tap into a different world that I feel like I was just so far away from. So education or educational channels, actually I feel like we need more educational channels like on our social media platform, because these days that's where we spend most of our time, so that we can expose to more realities that speaks to our lives, that speaks to, you know, people who fought for struggles, people that who shaped the world as it is right now. So I feel like people fought for liberation, but as young people of South Africa, we are not living like within that liberation. We are still living like we are trapped. There's so much information that's going on out there, but we are not reaching it out because we are actually focused on something else. So education of this kind is actually important, so that it can channel us to spaces where we can actually think as people that can change the world, not people who are thinking about stuff they can accumulate for themselves. You know what I mean? So
Just the last one, speaking about raising awareness and educating people, young people in particular, about the political landscape of South Africa, including its history. How do you think that your organization can drive, that kind of awareness and education to a certain extent, using creativity to drive civic education and encourage young people to take up space?
Look, man, as Tshwane Gospel Choir, we have this production that we call Spirit of Africa. So what we do in this production, we travel like to Europe, we travel like to Northern America. So what we do, it's a play. So we're not necessarily, as much as we are Tshwane Gospel Choir, in this production, we're actually doing a non-gospel music. There we celebrate our fallen heroes, like your Miriam Makeba, your Salif Keita, not only South African icons. So we actually dive into that kind of a space to say, let's think more about the history. And while we do it, we put it like in a musical form. So we do plays as well, where we try to just bring people to that kind of awareness. So I think it's just a matter of continuing with what we've been doing, but just expand it a little bit more, because I feel like, much as I'm saying, we've been doing this outside of the country and the continent as a whole. So why not just bring it into our own country and try to educate young people using the same, crafts that we possess.
Let me take this opportunity, Program Director, on behalf of the South African government and the entire people of South Africa, to convey our heartfelt condolences to the government and the people of Namibia after the passing on of our former President, His Excellency, Dr. Samuel Shafiishuna Nujoma, the late President of the Republic of Namibia. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the late President Nujoma lived his entire life in the service for freedom and the independence for the Namibian people. Dr. Nujoma became a Namibian revolutionary, an anti-apartheid activist, and a politician who served 3 terms of being the president of the people of the Republic of Namibia from 1990 to 2005. In 1960, Dr. Nujoma was a founding member and the first president of the Southwest Africa's People Organization, that is abbreviated as SWAPO. And we have seen Dr. Nujoma becoming actively involved in the anti-colonial politics during the 1950s, and he has also played a pivotal role as a leader of the National Liberation Movement, whereby he was campaigning for Namibia's political independence from the then South African oppressive rule. Program Director, the crowning glory of his freedom-fighting credentials can never be erased by anyone, and we ought to celebrate this legendary and a revolutionary leader of our African continent. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow us to say that indeed former President Nujoma was a leading statesman on the African continent, and his pivotal contribution to the liberation of the people of our continent will never be forgotten by all of us. He was an uncompromising African nationalist and a seasoned leader who firmly believed that Namibians' freedom was meaningless if her neighbors were not yet free. It is in this regard, Program Director, that as the South African government, we have considered this esteemed leader of our African continent, the son of Africa, who was a comrade in arms with our heroes such as Dr. Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, and other heroines of our liberation movement, Umama Nomzamo Winnie Mandela and Umama Albertina Sisulu, and many more. Throughout his life, he was an activist and a freedom fighter and a champion of social justice and a fair and new world order. Will forever be indebted to the sacrifices of such a legendary leader, whose greatness continues to inspire many of us in the continent of Africa and the world at large. Program Director, allow me to reiterate the commitment of our South African government when we saw it fit that we needed to give a befitting recognition to this son of the soil, Dr. Samuel Nujoma, wherein as the South African government, we have recognized him under the order of the Companion of O.R. Tambo, which was in gold, which was awarded to him on the 27th of April, 2018. As part of us celebrating this National Day of our Freedom Day, which is the 27th of April, we had to really recognize this legendary leader of our African soil. As I conclude, Program Director, allow me to take this opportunity to assure the government and the people of Namibia that South Africa shares with you in your grief. We are saying that your grief is our grief, your pain is our pain, your loss is also our loss as the people of South Africa. Program Director, may the revolutionary soul of our founding father of our independent Namibia, President Samuel Nujoma, continue to rest in peace.
Now it's time me to say.
Today we gather with heavy hearts as we pay tribute and celebrate the life of a giant of our history, founding president and father of the Namibian Nation, the late His Excellency Dr. Shafiishuna Nujoma. Born on 12 May 1929 in Etunda in Umsati of northern Namibia, Dr. Shafiishuna Nujoma grew up under a brutal system of South African colonial apartheid rule. From a young age, he recognized the deep injustice faced by his people and resolved to fight for their freedom. Working on the South African Railway in Windhoek as a young man, he saw first-hand discrimination and oppression suffered by Black Namibians. Instead of submitting to this injustice, he chose to challenge it. In the late 1950s, he became a leading voice against the racist apartheid laws, organizing protests, mobilizing his people. In 1960, he co-founded the Southwest Africa People Organization, well-known SWAPO, the driving force and the vanguard behind Namibia liberation struggle. His leadership was tested in December 1959 during the tragic Old Location massacre, when South African police brutally gunned down peaceful protesters against forceful removal of the old location to Katutura. This brutal event only strengthened his resolve and made him a target for colonial rule. Facing persecution from the colonial regime, President Nujoma made the painful but necessary decision to go into exile in 1960. He left the country and traveled through many African countries to inform the cause of freedom of the Namibian people. President Nujoma then traveled to New York and petitioned the United Nations to help Namibia to gain its independence, and spent nearly 30 years leading the fight of Namibia independence. His name and face became the symbol of Namibia liberation struggle. President Nujoma was a part of a generation of African revolutionaries who understood the true liberation required. Comrade Nujoma was a part of a generation of African revolutionaries who understood that true liberation required unity across the continent. A true Pan-Africanist who believed in unity, justice, and the dignity of all people. He was among his peers, such as Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Oliver Tambo, Abner Nasser, Ahmed Ben Bella, who saw the birth and the establishment of Organization of African Unity in 1963, which became the AU. He was also present during the formation of the non-aligned movement. Sam Nujoma was the first of the era of the forefathers, or he was the last of the era of the forefathers of the African liberation icons. As a true Pan-Africanist, President Nujoma moved a motion during an AU Heads of State Summit for the African Union anthem to be sung alongside the national anthems of each African country. This motion was adopted wholeheartedly and a living testimony of what we sang in this hall today. His journey is not just that of a leader. It is the journey of a people, of a shared struggle, of a common vision of justice, equality, and freedom. His fight for the liberation struggle was not limited to Namibia alone, but transcended beyond its borders. In the darkest days of apartheid, he stood shoulder to shoulder with other liberation struggle icons, such as Oliver Tambo, Augustino Neto, Samora Machel, Robert Mugabe, Yasser Arafat, and with Nelson Mandela, they remain advocates and use their influence on the international stage to push for the independence and self-determination for Palestine and Western Sahara.
I'd first of all like to say thanks a lot to High Commissioner Ngewete for the initiative he took so that we could meet here this afternoon, to give us as South Africans the possibility to pay a tribute to our leader, Sam Nujoma, and to say our final farewell. Thanks a lot, High Commissioner, for that initiative. On our program, the printed program, there's a picture there which is a very good picture. It's a well-known picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. You see it's got, if you look from the right, it's got Mwalimu, Julius Nyerere, then KK, then Uncle Sam, and then OR. It's a historic picture. I agree with our program director that there are, of course, others of our leaders who are not here in this picture, Agostino Neto and others. But whenever I look at this picture, it communicates one message. That in this region, and indeed elsewhere on the continent, we joined in one struggle to liberate our continent from apartheid and colonialism, and that was one struggle. It was one struggle fought on many fronts. And these 4 leaders that you see here represent that one struggle. But it also tells a message that, as I think has been said, that was also a Pan-African struggle. And so when we meet here this afternoon, we meet to celebrate our leader. Not just the leader of people of Namibia, but our leader. As Africans from the African continent and the African diaspora, we meet also to celebrate our leader, because Sam Nujoma was a leader of the peoples of this region. He was a leader of the peoples of Africa and the African diaspora. So it's an important moment. I'd really want to say thank you to everybody for coming, because at least all of us are united around that tribute which we need to pay to somebody who was of immense importance, not only to the people of Namibia, but I'm saying to the region, to our continent. As part of this collective of leadership, some of which is shown on this printed program, one of the outstanding contributions that Sam Nujoma made, together with his others, was to lead us, in fact, to lead the world in the final defeat and eradication of the global system of colonialism. Sometimes we forget this, we don't pay sufficient attention to this. In the latter stages of the colonial system, I'm talking about from 1945. In 1945, you had China, the Chinese defeating the Japanese occupation forces in China. That began the process of the final liquidation of colonialism in the world. It was followed that same year, 1945, with the independence of Vietnam. It followed in 1947 by the independence of India. And I'm sure all of us will recall that was 1947 in India. That it took almost 10 years after that before we saw the liberation process take place in sub-Saharan Africa. That's with the liberation of Sudan in 1956, Ghana in 1957. And then 1960, onwards, a whole series of countries on the continent gained their liberation from colonialism. Of particular note in the context of what I'm trying to say, you then had a gap with regard to the liberation of particular countries in Southern Africa. So whereas you see this whole process of the liberation of the continent for some time, then there's a break until the liberation of Angola, Mozambique in 1975. It took another 20 years to complete the process of the liberation of Southern Africa. What I'm trying to say is that this region proved to be the most stubborn area in the world in terms of the colonial system. And Comrade Sam Nujoma here was part of the leadership that defeated that stubbornness. We celebrate him, therefore, as a leader in that context. You'd remember that, Nkosazana will remember this, that in 1994, the AU summit was in Tunis. And that was the first time Madiba attended a summit meeting of the African Union. And when he spoke there, he said, we're meeting in a city which historically was called Carthage. Because Carthage was where Tunis is today. And you'd remember this statement by a Roman, Cato the Elder, who said, Carthago delenda est. 2,000 years before, Carthage must be destroyed. And it was destroyed. Madiba came more than 2,000 years later and said, now that we've completed the process of the liquidation of colonialism globally, Carthage must be rebuilt. I think that was the significance of the change that took place with the final liquidation of colonialism in this part of the continent. And I'm saying that we meet today to celebrate Sam Nujoma as one of the leaders who produced that particular historic outcome. I'm saying that ours was one struggle with many fronts. And in that context, Sam Nujoma was one of our own leaders. Not just a leader of the people of Namibia, but one of our own. And the High Commissioner has made reference here to the relationship between the ANC and SWAPO. And I must say thanks to the Deputy SG for empowering me to speak on behalf of the ANC. The High Commissioner was correct about the relationship between the ANC and SWAPO. In 1977-78, I was ANC representative in Nigeria. And when we got there, we found that SWAPO had already a representative in Nigeria. Comrade Konja Kambala. Konja was a commander of PLAN, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia. He had got injured, and in the course of his recuperation, he was sent to Nigeria to recuperate. So when we arrived, he says to me that, I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. And they sent me here to recover, and then they said, while you are recovering, please be a diplomat. And he said he wasn't. So he was very, very glad that we were there. So what happened? We combined the two offices of SWAPO and the ANC. It was one office. I was the leader of the office. Each of us, ANC and SWAPO, published our bulletins. But they had one editor. There were two of us there from the ANC, so one of us was the editor of the two bulletins. But the Nigerians every day, every week, would then receive these publications from two different offices, but in fact, it was one office. Uncle Sam came to Nigeria during that time. And we thought it was important that we must report this to him, that we're actually functioning not as two offices, but as one. He responded in a way that puzzled us at first. Quite agitated about that. And in the end, he says, but why did you people think it was necessary for you to report that? Because how else are you supposed to work, except in that form? He didn't like this thing that we reported to him as though it was something special.
We are here as the government of South Africa to really honor and celebrate with the Namibian people this gallant fighter of our revolutionary struggle, Dr. President Sam Nujoma. you would of course know that he was the one who was leading the liberation of the Namibia towards its independence, and he echoed the same sentiments to us as South African people when we were still colonized, to say the liberty and the freedom of the people of Namibia will be incomplete without the freedom of South African people. So that's why you've seen liberation movements winning the fight against colonialism within SADC and also within the entire continent of Africa. It was because of their relentless efforts, and they are dedicated towards freeing the people of the continent of Africa. And we are truly honored, and we are saying heartfelt condolences to the Namibian people and the Sam Nujoma family and friends during this difficult time.
The leadership qualities, values and principles which you think this very distinguished leader embodied in him, that we can copy and embrace in our efforts towards providing the needful impetus to consolidate the advancement of Africa, but at the same time to safeguard ourselves against the external elements that seek to continuously divide us.
You know, he embodied qualities around appreciating education. Just one of the speakers who spoke here, who gave a tribute to him, spoke about him having to register at the age of 80 for a degree in geology. Imagine a person who's already an elderly citizen pursuing that career path within geology, which is a very critical sector of our mining industries within the SADC region and the continent of Africa. He really embodied education, and I think as several leaders, we really need to walk in his footsteps and be able to educate our nations and be able to lead a society that is more transformed economically.
Amazing. Just the last one, your thoughts about, women being embraced, the agenda of women emancipation. We are to witness in the next few weeks the inauguration of the first female president of the Republic of Namibia. That is history on its own, and I think in my own interpretation says a lot about the foundation that President Sam had laid in making it also very fertile for women to take up space in positions of leadership and have a voice in tables that matter the most. Your thoughts about his leadership in terms of making the space feasible for female leaders like yourself to find relevant expression in corridors of politics?
You'd remember that South Africa also is recognized globally as a champion for issues of equity, especially issues of gender equality. You are seeing women as traditional leaders in South Africa. You are also seeing women as various CEOs of big corporates. You are also seeing women in the political space as ministers, as ambassadors. These are the efforts and the calls that were made by President Sam Nujoma and our President Nelson Mandela, where they called for equality in society, where they called for every member of society to be treated in an equal way. And I think we need to congratulate the Namibian people for having elected the first female president. And I think other countries ought to follow the examples of what Namibian people have done, because it's high time that women ought to be given their rightful space in leadership positions.
There was an African Youth Conference at some point in Madagascar. And SWAPO sent one young person, a member of the SWAPO youth, unfortunately fell sick during the course of the conference. So the ANC delegates at the conference, all of us, we then spoke. Whenever they called SWAPO to speak, we would stand up and speak. Nobody ever objected because we couldn't. Our comrade was not well, he wasn't there. And therefore, we had to act in this manner to report, to represent SWAPO. One occasion, Oliver Tambo led an ANC delegation to the States. And at the same time, Moses Karweb, Secretary General of SWAPO at the time, was also in the States, leading a SWAPO delegation. So it was then decided that no, we can't have two delegations, we'll have one delegation. So indeed became one delegation led by Oliver Tambo. It was interesting, Moses, it was during this time that President Reagan was president. So Moses Garweb would say, as he speaks, that there is a disease in the United States which is affecting us. And that disease is Reaganitis. The position that Reagan was taking towards the struggle for the liberation of the region. He called it Reaganitis. So the first day we were doing these things, OR calls a meeting in the evening and says to him, now Moses, stop that Reaganitis business of yours. We're talking to those Americans to bring them to our side to support us. You can't go around saying that they are sick, suffering from Reaganitis. I'm mentioning all of these things, colleagues, to indicate what High Commissioner Ngiwete said about the relationship between the ANC and SWAPO. And indeed, even when in 1989, when SWAPO had to campaign for election, SWAPO sent a message to us, communicated a message supported by a group of frontline state ambassadors who were in Namibia to support that process, that it was important to ensure that the population should turn up for the elections. December 1989. And therefore, it was necessary to have transport to ferry the voters to the polling stations. And could we help? And what happened was that we then spoke to NAFCOC, the black business organization here, to say, here's a challenge. We need to support SWAPO and the people of Namibia in this process. And we had this remarkable incident that 400 minibus taxis drove from South Africa to Namibia to ferry the voters to the polls. And Ambassador Ngiwete will remember this, that the voter turnout was actually 97% for that election. But I'm saying these things, colleagues, to indicate this relationship between the ANC and SWAPO, and therefore I'm saying it's a recognition of the fact that here we're dealing with a person who was a leader, not only of Namibia, but our own leader as well. And in that front of struggle, the Namibian front of struggle, the comrades there, I think, knew very, very early that in order to conduct struggle, you needed a brave, a courageous leadership. You needed a principled leadership with stamina to lead a protracted struggle, a leadership sworn to serve the people. You needed a thinking leadership, capable of taking the correct decisions, like the correct strategic and tactical decisions to defeat what was a strong, determined, and a cunning enemy. And you needed the people which, though oppressed, would know that it was his own liberator. So when I'm talking about the brave and courageous leadership and so on, I'm talking about Sam Nujoma. And part of what informed that thinking was the experience that they had. High Commissioner here referred to some of it. It starts, I think, with a terrible incident of the genocide against the Herero and the Nama people by German colonialism at the beginning of the last century. High Commissioner mentioned the massacre at the old location in Windhoek in December 1959. So I'm saying it was clear to the Namibian leadership that the colonial system in Namibia would respond in that particular way to anything which it considered a threat. And that's why you needed a particular kind of leadership that was ready to face that kind of danger. And Sam Nujoma was that kind of leader. And throughout his adult life, he was the face of the movement for the liberation of Namibia.